This is the first Sunday after Christmas. So most of us experience Christmas as an event, as a day. But in the church calendar, Christmas is a season. It's a 12-day season. That's where we get the song. So there's always a Sunday after Christmas before the beginning of a season that we call Epiphany, which will start next Sunday. So the whole idea is, we have this season of anticipation that we call Advent, where we're waiting. And then we're supposed to have this season where we get to celebrate. That was part of the reason for the song set this morning, that we wait for God to arrive, and then God arrives, and that's supposed to be a season of celebration. But for most of us, for most people, at least as I've grown up in the church and been around a lot of people, Christmas is a celebration, the event, right? We do a pretty good job of anticipating Christmas, whether that's, the season of Advent actually in church or just in your own personal lives, all the stuff that you have to do to get ready for Christmas. And then we're pretty good at celebrating the actual event, whether that's, Christmas Eve or Christmas Day or whatever. But once Christmas has come and gone, the event, the day, for most of us, life kind of goes back to normal. So we have all this build-up. We do a really good job experiencing the day, and then we return to basically normal life. So, and it's sort of ironic because it's exactly the opposite of what Christmas is supposed to be about, that you spend all of this time waiting for God to arrive, and then when God arrives, actually living with God is supposed to be enjoyable. It's supposed to be something that we spend all this time looking forward to God coming, and now God's actually come. Getting to live with God is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be enjoyable. But for a lot of people, it's not. The event is fun, but actually living with God day to day in this season that we call life is not really a celebration for most of us. So we're going to talk about that this morning. Our gospel passage is from Luke chapter 2. It starts this way. Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the Passover festival. When Jesus was 12 years old, they attended the festival as usual. Passover is kind of like Christmas in the sense that it's a celebration. It was one of many festivals that Jews would travel to Jerusalem to celebrate annually. And it was a celebratory festival. They were celebrating, and it's the same as Christmas. It's a great parallel. In the same way that at Christmas, we're kind of celebrating backward, right? We're looking back and we're celebrating the fact that 2,000 years ago, God came in the person of Jesus Christ. At Passover, first century Jews were looking back at the time when God showed up and rescued them from slavery in Egypt. So they were celebrating backward. And in the same way that we celebrate forward at Christmas, so Advent is about waiting for God to show up in the person of Christ, but it's also waiting for God to return. Passover is very similar. They're celebrating forward. So not only are they looking back and saying, okay, yeah, all those years ago, God liberated us from our slavery in Egypt, we're also looking forward to the day when God rescues us once and for all. And you see that in Luke's gospel and Zechariah's song. One of the things Zechariah says is that we're looking forward to the day when we can worship you without fear. You rescue us from our enemies so we can worship you without fear. That kind of idea. So at Passover, they're celebrating backward, but they're also celebrating forward. But the whole deal here is that, and Passover is a great stage setting for this story. They've traveled to Jerusalem, which from Nazareth would have been, 70 miles on foot, in caravan. So they've traveled to Jerusalem for this festival where they're celebrating basically how good and amazing God is. That God is a God of mercy. He's a God of rescue. God is a God of promise. God's good. So that's the stage setting. This is what happens. After the celebration was over, they started home to Nazareth, but Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents didn't miss him at first. I can understand that. Because they assumed He was among the other travelers. But when he didn't show up that evening, they started looking for him among their relatives and friends. When they couldn't find him, they went back to Jerusalem to search for him there. 3 days later, just 3 days later, 3 days later, they finally discovered him in the temple, sitting among the religious teachers, listening to them and asking questions. All who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. Okay, so Passover's over, right? Christmas can't last forever. And the event is over. And we're traveling back to ordinary life, right? We got to get back on the donkeys, load up the caravan, and we got to go back home. And at a certain point, as they're traveling home, they realize Jesus isn't there. I think one time, and it lasted about 30 seconds, where I didn't know where my kid was. And so if you've ever had that experience, it's unbearable. It's terrifying. So, and I can't imagine what it would have been like, in this big sort of traveling caravan of, donkeys or horses or, who knows, people everywhere. And I have no idea what that would have looked like. So they realize Jesus isn't there. So I imagine they're freaking out. And they're searching the caravan, they're looking around, trying to figure out where he is. And at some point, the story doesn't tell us, we don't know how long it took for them to come to the conclusion, he's not here. He's not here. And I don't know how far away from Jerusalem they were at the time. You ever forget something at home and there's that certain point where you're like, it's not worth it to go back. I don't know where they were, okay? But they realized they don't have their son. And so obviously the only option here is he never got in the caravan. He's back in the city, a big city, 12-year-old kid. So they hightail it back to Jerusalem. And they spend 3 days. Think about that. 3 days you don't know where your kid is in a huge city. And of course at Passover, I don't know the exact numbers, but at Passover the population of the city would swell because of course you have all of these travelers coming in from different parts of the world. There's all kinds of people there. I mean, you imagine just your worst nightmare, right? I mean, just your worst fears setting in. Did someone take him? You got all of these people who came into the city. Did he get nabbed by someone? And now he's gone and who knows where, 3 days. They search this city. Can't find him. No luck. And eventually they decide to go to the temple. The story doesn't tell us why. I would imagine it was to pray, right? At a certain point, you realize your only option is to pray. And so they go to the temple. And probably the furthest thing from their mind was, we'll find him there. I mean, maybe that's why they were going. That's the one place we haven't checked yet. Maybe. I don't know. The story's not clear on that. But they go in, and there he is. Sitting and having the kind of conversation that could not be further removed from emergency, right? They are in a state of panic and emergency. Jesus is sitting and having philosophical conversations with religious leaders. I mean, the juxtaposition is perfect. And that's why it's so great that the very next verse that Luke writes, so they come in and they see Jesus. You try to put yourself in their shoes and the experience that you've had, 3+ days of searching, and you've scoured the city, and you're frantic, and your worst fears are setting in, and you go in the temple probably to just pour out your anguish to God, and there's your 12-year-old kid having Bible discussions, right? And it says his parents didn't know what to think. His parents didn't know what to think. Well, of course they didn't. I mean, think about that. The second they walk into the temple, they must have immediately, they must have been, I don't even know what that would feel like. whether they thought he might be there or they were just showing up to pray or whatever it was, when they see him, what would that feeling be? I mean, just the relief, the exhilaration, it would literally be like going from death to life. I mean, in a moment, your whole life ended, and then it's back. I mean, I can't even imagine what that would be like. And then right next to that, coupled with that emotion, would be this instant realization that he's fine. And he's not worried about anything. What would you expect that scene to look like? You would expect to find a 12-year-old kid in a major city having been dislocated from his family for close to a week at this point to be hungry, angry, scared, all those things. And you would think that, they walk in, they see him, he sees them, and it would be, like in the movies. Everybody would get up, and there'd be this slow motion running toward each other, and you'd hug, oh my God, son, there would be that. There's none of that. There's none of that. I mean, from a story perspective, it's like they're worried about him. He doesn't seem to be worried about them. They recognize the gravity of this situation. He seems kind of oblivious to it, right? Just having a conversation. Here's the irony. This is the irony in this. Luke is a great storyteller. All the gospel writers are great storytellers. Here's the irony. You were just in Jerusalem celebrating a festival that's all about the goodness and the beauty of God. That God is this God of mercy and promise and goodness and rescue. God is so good. You just got done celebrating that. And then you leave, you can't find your kid, and the last place you go is the place of God. Because what 12-year-old kid could possibly want to be with God? Why would a 12-year-old boy ever choose to be in the temple? Of all the places he could have been, because they realized he chose this. I mean, that's why they don't understand. That's why they don't get it. That's why they don't know what to think. He's clearly not in duress. He's not in trouble. He's not being held there against his will. He is fully aware of what he's doing. He chose to be here. They don't get it. That's the irony. That's, I think, what Luke is trying to set up in this story. They show up for this festival where they celebrate the goodness of God, but then when the festival's over and they leave, realize they've lost their son, but they don't think to go there. Because why would you go there? Who would choose to be there if they didn't have to be? Who would choose? Who would choose to want to be in the place of God if it wasn't connected to something that you had to be there for? And I think a lot of people in contemporary Christianity experience and express faith that way. Christmas is very representative. It tends to be a season of heightened spiritual awareness and participation. People are a lot more likely to come to church during Advent. They're certainly a lot more likely to come to church at Christmas. Is why we have that title C&E Christians, like they show up at Christmas and Easter. Okay, people are a lot more likely to show up to church at Christmas. It's this sort of heightened season of spiritual awareness, participation. But then you come, you sing the songs, you pray the prayers, but then it's over. And who actually wants to live with God every other day of the year? I mean, who actually enjoys God? I mean, I don't know how many people even think about their faith this way. Think about somebody that you know really well, all right? Spouse, kid, best friend. You know that person. You know them intimately. And because of how you know that person, you want to be with that person. You enjoy that person. If you could choose, you would want to spend time with them. I don't know that people think about God that way. God is it's this thing that we believe in. The church is a place we go, or religion is this like a thing we do. But is God a person who we actually know and enjoy? So when the festival's over, and we just, we got done singing about how good God is and, his mercy and rescue and all that. And the festival's over, it's like, no. Of course that's where you would be. I mean, if you think about the way people even talk about it, people talk about church sometimes the way I talk about the dentist. Like I'll bump into somebody, oh man, I really need to get back to church. It's like stuff like that. What does it even mean? That's I say that about that. I really got to make a dentist appointment, right? It's like it would be really good for me. What person in your life who you know and love would you ever say such a thing about? I really ought to hang out with my kid. I really should talk to my wife today. Like you don't talk that way when it's a relationship with someone that you know and love and want to be with. But that tends to be the kind of language you hear around God and faith and church. Right? That's not how Jesus talked about his Father. Listen, this is what it says. Here's the conversation they have after almost a week of being apart. Son, his mother said to him, "Why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been frantic, searching for you everywhere." This is Jesus' response. "But why did you need to search?" Why'd you need to search, precocious little kid? He asked, "Didn't you know that I must be in my Father's house?" I mean, it's almost like Jesus looks at them and goes, well, how many places did you look before you came here? Seriously. How long have you been looking? Yeah, I've been here the whole time. Why did you need to search? Didn't you know that I must be in my Father's house? And the story doesn't, in my reading of the story, it doesn't sound like what he's saying is a must as in obligation. I should be in church. It's the right thing to do. It to me it reads like, where else would I be? Where else would I be? Why would I want to be anywhere else? I need to be here. I want to be here. Right? It's almost like this is my home. That's just not how most of us talk and think about God. But that's what the Christmas season is supposed to highlight for us. It's why this passage is in the lectionary. Christmas isn't an event, it's a season. And it's a season for that reason. It's meant to drive home this idea that we spend all this time waiting for God to show up. And when God finally shows up, the whole point is that you're actually supposed to enjoy him and live with him. Not be like, oh, phew, so glad he came, and then kind of like move on. But no, we get to actually live with God every day. But that's just not how most of us think about it. What's the difference? What did Jesus know that we don't know? Or that we knew but we've forgotten? Or that we know but we don't live like we know? So one of the things that Jesus knew that we often don't is Jesus knew. He knew his Father. And I don't mean he knew about his Father. And most of us know about God. We talk about God, right? We pray to God. We sing about God. But many of us don't know God. Not the way we know our spouse or our kids or our best friend. We don't know God that way. Jesus knew his Father that way. In Matthew chapter 11, it says, "My Father has entrusted everything to me. No one truly knows. No one truly knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him." No one knows the Father except the Son. That Jesus knew the Father in the way that you know the most intimate relationship that you have in your life. And because Jesus knew the Father in that way, he knew the Father to be someone he actually wanted to be with. I must be in my Father's house. Where else would I be? Where else would I live? Where else would I go? This is where I want to be. This is what I want to do. Because unlike you, I actually know my Father. And my Father is the kind of person, if you knew him the way I know him, you would want to be with him. Like every day, like all the time. It wouldn't be like, you wouldn't talk about God the way you talk with the dentist. God would be like a spouse or a best friend. Jesus knew the Father. Not about the Father, but knew the Father. And you just have to ask yourself the question, do you? I mean, a lot of us don't. I mean, it's just reality. Like in our lived experience every day, faith, religion, church, it's a place we go, it's something we do, it's a set of things that we believe. But it's not a person we love. And the command is not to believe in God or fear God or worship God or obey God. I mean, those are all things that are commands, but the greatest command is to love God. It's to love God. Because if you loved God, everything else kind of takes care of itself. But to love God, you have to know. You have to know God as someone who you should love. It would be silly and insane not to if you actually knew God. But Jesus knew God. But the other thing that Jesus knew that I think we don't know, or at least we've forgotten, or don't live like we know, Jesus knew that life is connection to God. See, for a lot of us, we think that life is, it's the accumulation of goods and experiences, right? Life is how you spend your time every day. So when you think about your life, if I said, what is your life like? You're going to describe all the stuff that you do and don't do and, all that. The way we think about life is that it is something that you can have completely apart from God, right? God exists, God doesn't exist. You're still getting up and, doing what you do and going where you go and whatever. That's not how Jesus thought about life. That life is, by definition, is connection to God. In John chapter 5, verse 26, Jesus says, the Father has life in himself. You and I, we don't have life in ourselves. Life is derivative. It's given to us. God is life, is the source of life. God has life in himself and has given this same life-giving power to the Son. See, Jesus knew that life itself is in God. That you might get up and you might go about your day apart from God or with no sort of conscious connection to God or care. But the reality is, if God is real, then the breath in your lungs are dependent on God. And Paul would say God holds all things together. So in the same way that you do not exist if it were not for some person who produced you, and you would not be here right now as the person you are if not for an army of people who have loved you and cared for you and helped to develop you over the years. That's how Jesus sees the Father. There is no such thing as life apart from God. You might think there is, but you're just living a lie. That your whole existence is dependent on God. The way that the Apostle Paul would say this, he was talking to some Greek philosophers once, and he says that it's in God that we live and we move and we have our being. We live and we move and we have our being in God. It's like there is no such thing as life apart from God. Yes, you got to go back to Nazareth. Yes, you got to get back to doing the stuff of everyday, ordinary existence. Yes. But I think the symbolism in the story here, where Jesus says, didn't you know I had to be, I must be in my Father's house. The temple is the house of God. It's symbolic. It's Jesus' home. It's Jesus' home. Not the temple, not the building, but God. God the Father is Jesus' home. You all grew up in a home. Now, if it was healthy, and not all homes are, if it was healthy, your home was a place where you were safe. Your home was a place where you were loved, you were known and loved, and that's important, right? People knew you, so they knew all the good and all the ugly and loved you, committed themselves to you. Home was the place where your identity was formed and shaped. You went out into the world from your home, and your home was the place that you came back to at the end of the day. The home is the place where sometimes you can be known and loved so closely and intimately, like words don't even have to be spoken. You're just known. It is the place where your whole identity as a human being is formed and shaped. See, that's how Jesus thought about his Father. My Father is home to me. My Father is where I'm safe. My Father is where I'm loved, where I'm known. My Father is the place that I live out of. It's my whole identity. There is no such thing as life apart from my home. That's how he thought about it. Christmas is the invitation for us to think about God that way. Because of Christmas, we can know what Jesus knew. We can know God the way that Jesus knew the Father. Right? The consistent testimony in the New Testament is that God is fully revealed in the person of Jesus Christ. If you want to know the Father, you look at the Son. So when we look at the Son, we see the God that Jesus knows. Jesus would say multiple times, if you know me, you know the Father who sent me. So we don't have to wonder about what God is like. We know what God is like by looking at the Son. That's what Christmas affords us. In addition to that, we can begin to think of God through Christ as home for us. Like one of the things that Jesus says is that you have to remain in my love. Abide in my love. God through Christ is supposed to be our loving home. That what it means to be a Christian person is to get up every day and to know your Father as a God of perfect love toward you. God is where you are safe. God is where you are at home. God knows you, loves you. God is where you form and shape your whole self-understanding. How you think about yourself and other people and the world, all of that is supposed to be shaped and formed in God. Right? This God of love revealed in the person of Jesus Christ. I don't know. Sometimes, in my line of work, I forget. I'm far enough along now that I forget what it's like to even try to live life without God. I don't even know what that looks like or why anyone in their right mind would try to do that. I don't know why anybody would want any other kind of life than to know God as God is and to actually get to live with God every day. The God that gave you life, that you can actually know that God and love that God and be with that God. I don't know why any person would ever want to live any other way. See, that's the invitation for the Christmas season. We waited in anticipation, and God has shown up. Now it's time to celebrate, right? Now's the time of fulfillment. It's time to live in God. So the question is super easy, right? I mean, it's easy to ask, harder to answer, right? Do you actually know God as someone that you genuinely enjoy and want to be with? Is that how you think about God? That God is someone you enjoy? You should think about that word. I chose it specifically, enjoy. That if given options, you would choose to be with God because God is just that good. That's the challenge of Christmas.